Shalom Aleichem Chevron, a good and Erev Shabbos. We find at the beginning of our Parsha a slight discrepancy between the way Bilam describes Klal Yisrael and the way Balak describes Klal Yisrael. When Bilam is being hired by Balak, Balak tells Bilam, Hine ha'am yatzeh Mitzrayim, behold the nation which has left Mitzrayim. Yet when Bilam is talking to the Rabban Hashem a few psukim later, Bilam doesn't describe us as a nation which has left Mitzrayim, but he says, Hine ha'am hayotzeh Mitzrayim. Behold, they're a nation which is leaving Mitzrayim, talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim in the current tense as opposed to in the past tense. What difference is there between describing us as a nation which has left Mitzrayim and a nation which is leaving Mitzrayim? What did Bilam see in Klal Yisrael that Balak wasn't able to see that caused Bilam to describe us as a nation which is leaving Mitzrayim as opposed to a nation which has left Mitzrayim? Rav Moshe Feinstein in Drash Moshe teaches us a very important lesson. And Rav Moshe Feinstein says we see the difference between these two descriptions of Klal Yisrael, how a person is supposed to react to hardships in their life. Rav Moshe says when a person deals with a hardship, whether it's financial, spiritual, emotional, physical, but a person goes through a difficult kufa, a difficult period in their life, and a person overcomes that bump and is able to move past it. A person has two choices how they want to look at that period in their life. A person can look back and say, good riddance, I'm happy that I'm over with it. Let's move past it. I want to erase that part of my history. I want to move past that difficult point and move on to greener pastures, move on to something that's more enjoyable, something that's better, something that I don't need to deal with the challenges. And I want to erase that part of my history, erase that part of what took place in my past. Or a person has the ability to say, I recognize that the greatness that I have right now, I recognize that the growth that I have right now is a direct result of the challenges and the trials that I faced. I recognize that because I went through what I went through, it allowed me to become a bigger and better person. And I don't want to erase that part of my history. I don't want to be ashamed of that part of my history. I want to celebrate it because I recognize that now that I was able to get over that bump is what allowed me to rise to a much higher level than had I lived without that challenge. Had I lived without those tests, those trials and tribulations, had I lived a life which is just smooth sailing. And therefore I don't want to erase that part of my history. I want to celebrate that part of my history, recognizing that it's what allowed me to become the person that I am today. Says Rav Moshe, when Balak looked at Klal Yisrael, Balak thought we're like every other nation. Balak said they spent years, hundreds of years in Mitzrayim, in Eretz Haaretz, dealing with physical and spiritual difficulties, and therefore they probably want to forget about that period in their lives. They probably want to move forward, move towards the world called Har Sinai, move towards the world called Eretz Yisrael, and leave Mitzrayim behind them. They're a nation which has left Mitzrayim. They're a nation which wants to erase that part of their history, forget about Mitchila Oivdei Avodah Zarah Haya Avisenu, and want to move on to the world of Ha'achshav Karvanu Ha'makom. Yet Bilam, who was a Navi like Moshe Rabbeinu, was able to see something deeper about Klal Yisrael. Bilam recognized that within Klal Yisrael is this Nakuda which is called Hine Am HaYotzeh Mitzrayim. They're a nation which is leaving Mitzrayim. They have a mitzvah every single day to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim. To remember that the reason why they were able to leave Mitzrayim is because of the fact that they were able to withstand the challenges and withstand the tests and temptations that were in Mitzrayim. And because they went through the Kor HaBarzel of Mitzrayim, they were able to rise to the place of being called a Daradea. They're a nation which doesn't want to erase the past, doesn't want to erase our history, which isn't always perfect, but recognizes that because of the challenges, because of the trials that we went through, is what allowed us to get to the place called Har Sinai, allowed us to get to the place called Eretz Yisrael. And therefore Bilam describes us as a nation which is leaving Mitzrayim, a nation which is not embarrassed and ashamed of our history, a nation which doesn't try to whitewash our history and say everything was perfect, but a nation which recognizes that, yeah, we have challenges and we have difficulties, both physical and spiritual. But the very fact that we deal with those difficulties and the fact that we're able to overcome those challenges, get over the bump and move forward is what allows us to become the nation which is called the Am HaNivchar. And therefore Bilam describes us as a Am HaYotzeh Mitzrayim. We're a nation which is constantly remembering the fact that we were in Mitzrayim and constantly remembering what we looked like when we left Mitzrayim because we had to deal with the challenges of being stuck in Eretz Haaretz. And it's such an important lesson for us to remember. We're all inevitably going to deal with challenging days. And we can look back at those days and say, I want to forget those days. I want to put them in my past. I want to ignore them. I want to make believe they never happened. Says Rav Moshe, a Yid doesn't do that. A Yid doesn't move on. A Yid recognizes that my history even if it's not always perfect. But my history, the challenges that I went through, is what allowed me to become who I am today. The fact that I dealt with that world called Mitzrayim, I was stuck in a Meitzar, I was stuck in a constricting place, and I overcame the challenge, is what allows me to be the great person that I am today. And therefore I don't try to erase my history, I'm not ashamed of my history, but rather I celebrate the fact that I dealt with challenges as a human being in this world of the Yetzer Hara, in a world of temptations, and I overcame them. And that's what allowed me to become the person that I am today. Hashem should help us that we shouldn't face challenges, but when we do, we should recognize that they're an opportunity for growth. And when we overcome the challenges, we should be able to look back at those difficult moments in our life and celebrate them and see them as being part of the greater picture of growth that we've had in our lives. Hashem should bless us to be able to get over those challenges and to be able to utilize them in the proper way, to be able to view them in the proper way. And Hashem, by doing that, individually and collectively, be able to go to Mashiach and be zeichet to the Binyan Beis HaMikdash Meher V'Yameinu. Have an amazing Shabbos.
Thank you.